This is Ground Affected. My name is Brent,
and welcome to a bowl of noodles and a little bit of wet salad on the side.
and in today's video, I'm going to show you how I painted Groot from 3D Wicked. Links for 3D Wicked in the description below. As well as, while you're down there, why don't you check out my Patreon? Yes, I'm going to tell you about it now before most of you click off and find something more interesting to watch. If you join the Patreon, you get nothing, but you do get access to the Discord, where we speak daily about models, 3D printing, making things, and things. And if you would like to be part of the most coolest and exclusive group upon the internet, then click the link below. Also, try to click the like button and perhaps click subscribe. If I haven't earned it, you can unsubscribe at the end of the video, as well as follow the instructions I will give you at the end of the video. And now, let's get straight into the painting of the Groot. I know that a lot of people have been asking about preparation videos for making 3D prints. However, this is not one of those, but you can see some of it as I'd kept it in. In one of my previous videos, I went over using wood filler, which was a suggestion from one of my commenters, and I used this to fill the gaps on the model. What I did was let that dry, and then I sanded that smooth, and that gave me a pretty seamless finish. I then painted everything black and zenithal that. And then, as per usual, I realized that was a mistake, so I painted it black again. And I started painting the base using the darkest brown that I have. I used chipping from Ammo by Meg, and I basically blotched this into all the areas of wood. Then using contrast orc flesh, I painted all the greens on the base. I then used red leather from Ammo by Meg, and I airbrushed that onto the highlights of all the wood. I then went over all the metal pieces that are in this base with dark silver from Pro Acryl. Then using Flesh Terror's red, I went through the plants that needed red on them, and I went to a dry brush immediately using red leather, and I mixed into the red leather a little bit of burnt sand, also from Ammo by Meg. I used two different types of dry brush. I used a small one for the main dusting of color, and I used a bigger one to just catch the ridges of the smaller details on the top of the piece. I then used alien purple and blue violet to paint the flowers, as well as using crystal blue to mix with them on the two flowers on the front of the base. I just mixed this with a wet blending. I'll have to do a video in future on that technique. I then did something that makes my skin curl, and I used a wash to wash all the wood parts on this model. I really don't enjoy using washes as they tend to give quite a dirty look, but it was one of the ways to do wood in this specific case. And then I proceeded to miss out on a load of footage because I forgot to click record amongst the issues that I'm having with my camera and my computer speaking to each other at the moment. So basically, to get that moss look, all I did was I sponged on a slightly darker green, which was goblin green, and used jungle green over the top of that in the speckled little areas. I airbrushed the tips of the flowers using molten orange from Army Painter's airbrush range, and I used the contrast orc flesh green and dark angels as a mix between each other to paint the rest of the green leaves on the base. I went back in with Flesh Terror's red again, and I covered up parts that never got a good solid coating on the first go round. You can see me working between parts as I go. In this kind of case, I don't want to put too much attention onto the base. However, it is the most detailed part of a piece like this anyway, which is kind of awkward because I don't want the attention to be only on the base. But I also can't miss out painting the base, so I have to work on both parts but try and give it enough but not too much. I used a wet blend on the tips of these little stamen coming out of the flowers. I used Demon Yellow and Molten Orange to make this blend. I then also used a dry brush to help get some of those blends a little bit smoother, and I took a dry brush of white over all the metal on the base. This is to pick out all the ridges and make the details look a little bit sharper. I used matte white and a thin brush, and I went through all the edges, and I did edge highlighting on all the metal pieces facing up and to the front of the base, mainly because this will give more definition to those metal pieces and help them stand out and give your eye something more to look at and a little bit more interest in the base without going overboard and being too eye-catching. I then used a small sponge in my tweezers, and I dipped that into green goblin mixed with a bit of yellow, imp yellow specifically from Army Painter, and I patched that into all the places on the grass around the top of the base. This was to highlight the grass. Then using Burnt Rust Red, which is a pigment powder from AK Interactive. I went over all of the base, mostly only on the ground, a little bit up onto the metal pieces, and I just put pigment powders everywhere to bring some richer reds to get a good contrast between the greens. I used grass tufts and all the tufts that I could find in my tuft box, and I stuck them all around the base. It is a plant base after all, so plants all over the place. It's gonna look better if there's more plants. Pretty simple, really. Annoyingly, I really do wish that I had time to go and get some moss. I wanted to get moss and do this with some real moss flock, which would have been really cool, but I didn't have the time. Then using a black base and not being an idiot and making a Zenithal highlight, I was able to start the painting of Groot's body. Groot is really simple to paint. Instead of painting the solid just with the large paintbrush and the darkest brown I have, I started with black. Using black is going to keep my shadows. I then dabbed the paint on. You can see a technique of this in one of the Space Marine videos that I've made in the past. Dabbing the paint on allows the paint to sit only on the highest ridges and doesn't settle into the deepest crevices, giving you a shade before you've even started. So using this dabbing method, you're able to place the color in good coverage, but at the same time retain a bit of shadow and detail. And then, in order to be different from the bark on the base, I dry brushed it immediately with burnt sand, and I skipped red leather altogether. This was the first layer of dry brushing, again using a small brush, trying to get as much dusting as I can. I did this to all the parts and also really specifically aimed it from the top. I am still kind of using a big broad stroke, but I'm mainly coming from the top on this. I then mixed warm skin tone from Ammo by Meg with the burnt sand that I had originally used, and I used my larger brush to brush this over just the high points, not going underneath the model to any of the shadows at all at this point. And by doing this, I created quite a light base to start off with. I needed him to get lighter because I'm gonna wash him. And because I'm washing him, I need him to be quite light so that when he gets stained by the wash that I'm using, which is Agrax Earthshade, it's gonna make him go a little bit darker. So by making it lighter, I'm already preempting the fact that the final color is going to be slightly darker, so we need to go one tone a little bit lighter, if that makes any sense. Using the wash, making sure not to let it pool too much in areas, because of course the pooling does not look good at all. I then took a dry brushing of the same burnt sand and warm skin mix over the top of this. I then used a smaller dry brush to force some of the edges and make sure that those edges that I wanted to look lighter were now a lot lighter. The next thing that Groot needs is to look like he has moss growing on him, and I used Goblin Green for this from Army Painter's standard range, as well as Jungle Green and a mix of Demonic Yellow and a little bit of matte white as well. And I did this just to the edges. These are the highest points on the parts, almost where the highlights would be on Groot, as well as not using too much on my brush and using a load on my brush. I can vary the amount that I put on the model. So using a very dry brush, I can use it almost as a filter, but using it thick, I can catch the edges and get them a little bit greener. Now working on his face, I'm going to take a dark tone from Army Painter and I'm going to paint that into the eyes, the sockets of the eyes, the mouth, and the ridges around his face, and a couple of the deep grooves and cuts on his portrait as well. Then using a little bit of warm skin mixed into the original oak brown from Army Painter, I'm going to paint the lighter teeth inside of his mouth, making sure I get the front and the back. I added a touch of matte white to that mix so that it was nowhere near white, but almost an off kind of white creamish color, and I painted the whites of his eyes. I'm not sure whether Groot has pupils, but I felt like he looked a bit scary without pupils, so I gave him pupils, but they're just black and only black. I put highlights onto those pupils and I put glossed paint over the top of them to give it life, and that is how it was. End of that story. Thank you for coming. Please come again soon. And now that we're at the end of the video, I would like to talk about a couple things happening over on the Patreon and within the Discord. One of those is that I'm going to be doing an Artist of the Month amongst my Patreons. This happens over on the Discord. There is a channel specifically for this. By the end of the month, I will give a date, and everybody's entries should be in for that date, a model or a statue that has been painted or completed within that month. If it was started before, it's not a major thing, as long as you completed it that month. And what will happen is, I will go over them and choose someone who I feel deserves to be shouted out on the channel at the end of one of these videos, as well as a feature on my Instagram. Also, in other news, I have a competition that I'm going to be running very soon. This will be for everybody, so keep your eye out for that. It will be announced on Instagram, and I will share something about it in the community tabs on YouTube as well. This will be a painting competition, whether it be a model that you 3D printed or something that you sculpted yourself. However, I've already been working on some prizes for this. Mostly the prizes will be along the 3D printing area, but there will be some cool prizes, and hopefully you guys will be all keen to enter this competition. So keep your eyes out for when I post information about these things on any of the social networks. And now that we've got to the end of the video, there's only one thing that we all know that is left to do, even though the eyes are being blinded by the lights of terror. If you felt like the video was not good enough for you, just click the dislike button, bro, and f*** off. Genuinely, the lights feel so much brighter today. What the hell?